Welcome to the Richard Daly Podcast, bringing you a UK perspective on the latest news and developments from the world of podcasting and internet radio.
Welcome to episode 19. I'm your host, Richard Daly. Each week I curate and discuss the latest news on podcasting and internet radio with a focus on the smaller podcaster and radio host. So where to start this week? Well, look, podcasting is hard, isn't it? You've probably noticed I've been away for a few weeks, and it is sadly easy to get off track with podcasting. I'd missed a couple of weeks because I lost my voice in the aftermath of a cold, and then I had a trip abroad. After that, well, let's just say life got in the way. I have to say I envy those digital nomads who can travel and still get work done. I always do set out with good intentions, but it never seems to quite happen. Anyway, I'm back on the wagon now, and I'm committed to delivering my weekly roundup of podcasting and internet radio news to you. Don't forget, if there is a particular story or topic you'd like me to cover, then do get in touch. All that said, let's get on with the show. Let's start this week with a piece from Brad Hill over at Rain News titled, "The Download on Podcasts Discovery is a Two-Way Street." There are now over 300,000 podcasts competing for the ears of listeners, and Brad discusses how difficult podcast discovery is currently, particularly as nearly all of those podcasts are listed on the Apple Podcast app. And this is probably the most important place that people are searching to find podcasts. There are some people trying to provide alternative directories and to make it easier for consumers to find podcasts to listen to. But what is emerging now is that podcast networks and advertisers are also finding it difficult to find podcasts and hosts to work with. Podcast networks are looking for experienced hosts, and advertisers want to find podcasts that fit their products. PRX recently ran the PodQuest Challenge, which was a talent search which gave prizes to 10 finalists, and NPR Storylab has funded 3 pilot podcasts, as well as creating an open submission platform where anyone could submit ideas for their own podcast. I guess the question is, will someone create a marketplace or notice board where podcasters can go to find out about these kind of opportunities, kind of discovering the discovery opportunities, if you know what I mean? Might be a business idea for someone, perhaps. Also from Rain News comes the confirmation that Spreaker's new content management system is now available for all of the podcast hosts on the platform. This new tool is designed to make managing your podcast content easier. The new CMS includes a customizable embedded player that has options for choosing the displayed image and resizing it, enabling or disabling the playlist, and automatically streaming live episodes. For hosts on Spreaker with lots of episodes, there is now the ability to add, move and delete episodes in bulk. The CMS also supports changing dates on published episodes, which I know is something many hosts have been asking for. You can also edit the permlinks of shows and episodes. I'll put a link to the full announcement from Spreaker's blog in the show notes for this episode. And of course, you can find the show notes at richarddaly.com/19. From the Hot Pod newsletter published by Nick Quah comes news that the New Statesman newspaper here in the UK has started publishing a weekly podcast review column. The first post in this new column was called "Why It's Time to Start Writing About Podcasts as Culture." The aim of the column is stated as being to fill a gap in writing about podcasts and to challenge those producing podcasts to be better at it. It will be interesting to see where this column goes. A brief article from Forbes by Sarah Ray Werner asks, "Does your podcast matter?" I think this is an important piece for independent niche podcasters to read. Many, actually probably nearly all podcasters, are constantly looking at their download stats. I know I do. And of course we worry about the number of listeners that we've got. Sarah notes what Rob Walsh from Libsyn regularly says, which is that the median number of downloads for each podcast episode is just 150 to 160 per episode per month. So the question raised in this article is, if I'm only getting a small audience for my podcast, does my work matter? When I'm asked this question, I like to refer to Paul Colligan, the host of the Podcast Industry Report podcast. Paul often repeats the mantra that audience size doesn't matter. It is what you're doing with and for that audience that is important. Revenue is not always tied to audience size, and neither is the value you can add to your listeners. News on podcast monetisation that will be of interest to smaller podcasters now. Patreon and Podomatic have announced a partnership that allows Podomatic podcasters to link their Patreon page from their Podomatic profiles. Podomatic have been around since 2005, and they're one of the biggest services providing publishing and hosting services to podcasters. Patreon, of course, help creatives build income and to connect with their fans. Now, this is not a particularly earth-shattering development, but anything that makes podcast monetisation easier has to be welcomed, and Podomatic and Patreon have made it really easy to set up a funding page. So if you're on Podomatic, do check this one out. I mentioned podcast discovery platforms earlier, and one of them, Podxref, has announced that it has a new feature called Watchlist Notifications. Podxref, that's spelled Podxref, is a startup that is looking to make podcast discovery easier, and Watchlist Notifications is designed to help this by allowing users to bookmark their favourite shows, hosts and guests, and to be notified when matching programmes become available. This is quite a clever idea, as the notifications are likely to drive users back to the app, which of course increases stickiness of usage. Obviously the key is to have a big directory of podcasts to make this a useful tool. I understand that Podxref only has a few hundred podcasts listed currently, so it's going to take them some time to build up to a critical mass. Something for online DJs now, but I think this might bring useful lessons to some podcasters as well. Last week Mixcrate announced that it was shutting down its DJ Mix hosting site. In an article on djtips.com, Phil Morse explores the shutdown and considers what lessons DJs can learn from the situation. Mixcrate launched in 2010 and hosted mixes for many DJs and was also popular with music listeners and clubbers who listened to and shared those DJ mixes. It actually had become one of the world's best known DJ mix sites. They announced that they're shutting down after they received a letter from a respected member of the music industry, they don't say who, and whatever this letter said, it means they cannot continue to operate. So I think we can all assume this must be related to music licensing issues. One of the attractions of Mixcrate over probably the main alternative currently, Mixcloud, was that mixes could be made downloadable on Mixcrate, and I guess that probably didn't help their legal position. So what lessons does Phil Morse think DJs should learn from the closure of Mixcrate? Well, the main issue is that some DJs were relying on the site to build a fan base, and I guess it's a case of the old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket, or perhaps to use the more modern equivalent, don't make your home on rented ground. Phil lists 5 great points to help DJs avoid falling into this trap, and I think all of these can be equally applied to podcasters. Number 1, pick your mix streaming service wisely. Basically, do what you can to find a service that is likely to stay around, and make sure it's a legal site. Number 2, don't rely on your online service as your only backup. Now this is vital, you must keep your own backups in the cloud, on hard drives or DVDs, but multiple copies in multiple locations so you can always get your original material back. Number 3, have your own website. You can put links on your site to where your fans can find your mixes. If your mix host site shuts down, all you need to do then is to change the links. Number 4, encourage your followers to share their contact details with you. Try to get your fans to give you their email addresses so that you can stay in contact with them on whichever sites you're using. Number 5, keep an eye open for changing industry circumstances. It's important to keep up to date with trends and new services as they become available. So try and stay ahead of the curve, and where it looks like a service might go away soon, maybe that's time to get off of it or diversify. So some great advice there from digitaldjtips.com. Finally this week, LinkedIn's marketing department has been running its own podcast for a while now, and they've published an infographic titled Who Listens to Podcasts and Why They Matter to Marketers. The data that LinkedIn has compiled in this infographic covers a number of statistics gathered from asking more than 2,700 LinkedIn members in a survey whether they listen to podcasts. Now, if your audience is on LinkedIn, then you will want to take notice of these figures. So let's have a quick look at the stats. So this is about LinkedIn members. Less than 1 in 10 do not know what a podcast is, in fact only 8%. 35% of LinkedIn members globally listen to podcasts. And millennials are the sweet spot of the LinkedIn audience. 42% of those under 35s listen to podcasts, 36% of 35 to 64-year-olds, and 33% of those over 65 years old are LinkedIn members listening to podcasts. Here's something that's important in marketing terms for podcasts. Those with senior roles are listening even more. 44% of department heads, VPs, owners and C-suite members who know what a podcast is make time to listen to them. This is compared to 36% of less senior colleagues. There are some more stats on the infographic, particularly covering penetration for markets across the world and about travelling and listening to podcasts. Do check out my show notes at richarddalley.com/19 for a link to the article. Well worth reading if you have any part of your audience on LinkedIn. The article concludes that using podcasts for marketing, particularly business-to-business marketing, can be very valuable. The levels of engagement are certainly impressive, and it does seem like a high proportion of executives and those with buying power are listening. I'll end the episode this week, as usual, with the Where Can You Meet Me feature. I will be at RAIN Summit Europe in London this coming Wednesday, the 2nd of November. I attended this event last year. It's a well-run event with lots of speakers covering all things audio, including radio and podcasting. These RAIN events are great value and well worth attending. So if you're going to RAIN Summit Europe, then do let me know and we can look to meet up during one of the networking breaks. Okay, so that's all from the Richard Daly podcast for this week. If you visit my website at richarddalley.com, you'll be able to find all my social media links, as well as the various ways you can subscribe to this show. The show notes for this episode are at richarddalley.com/19. As usual, please send me your questions or comments, and if there is a topic you'd like me to cover, then you can tweet me. Thank you for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.